northeast corner of Iowa, 5 miles southeast of the St. Sebald settlement, at the base of Chicken Ridge, lies Strawberry Point. Settled by hardy, old-world farmers, the town was forged by strong ties to family, tradition, and a fierce respect for independence. Despite their conservative nature, the people of Strawberry Point have always held humor in great esteem and enjoyed a streak of flamboyant eccentricity. This unequaled capacity for self-expression has pervaded the town's history, from its early feats of daring do to its present-day knack for self-promotion. But no one could have imagined that the town that boasted having the thriftiest Main Street, with the friendliest merchants, would on a sunny afternoon in the summer of 1930 experience the most unexpected event in its history, an ordeal that would test the very timber of its good nature.
This is a robbery. Up against the wall. Up against the wall. Up against the wall. Up against the wall. To your left. To your left. Up against the wall. Go. Left. Move along. Get in. Get in. Get in. Get in.
At 15 minutes before 3, Tuesday afternoon, June 24th, 3 young men entered the Union Bank and Trust Company of Strawberry Point. One stood near the door. A second stepped up to the cashier's window and asked Merle Schmidt for a bank draft. The last man stepped to the second window and, pointing a gun at assistant cashier Helen Yar, he ordered her to stick up her hands and stick them up high. She obeyed. The first and second man then flashed their guns and covered Merle Schmidt and bookkeeper Hilda Swanziger. Hilda and Helen were at once taken to the vault, handcuffed, and told to keep their eyes shut. They were then locked inside. Sylvan Bixby and John Adams stepped into the bank and were surprised to hear a sharp command to close their eyes and feel cold steel against their ribs. They too were led to the vault. Constable Wesley Carpenter then happened into the bank. When he saw the guns, he decided to do what he was told. Cora Paul from Arlington and George Opperman were the last to enter the bank. Behind the railing stood Merle Schmidt and a stranger. A second man stuck a gun that looked like a cannon against George's side and ordered them both to the rear of the room. Like the rest, they were handcuffed and admonished to keep their eyes shut. They became the 7th and 8th persons locked in the vault. It was pitch dark, but George kept his eyes closed. He knew there were others in the vault. He could hear them breathing. He could also hear one of the gang swearing at Merle Schmidt, commanding her to turn over the money. Visibly shaken, Merle dumped the money into a grip. Ordered to the rear, her hands were tied with copper wire, and she was led into the vault. Once again, everyone was admonished to be quiet or they would die. One at a time, the robbers left the bank, each closing the door behind him. Miss Dolores Mearson, sitting across the street, saw them leave. They entered their car and drove eastward. 9 people remained in the vault, breathing, silent. Clayton County Press-Journal, Thursday, June 26, 1930.
Oh, I worked at a lot of things. I worked in the grocery store, I peddled papers, I delivered bread for the local bakery, and this was back in the days when no bakery trucks came into town. Your little small town bakeries were busy industries. They done very well. And I clerked at the hotel. That was after I graduated from high school. Yeah. Night clerk. Had a prestigious job that made me $4 a week, room and board. I remember the family that was involved. It lived approximately a half a mile southeast of town, and a rather handsome young man that was involved in the robbery, and everyone liked him quite well. And it comes a very big surprise, I think, to the entire community when they discovered that he was the one that engineered the robbery. And I suppose one of the very funny things that I remember was this gentleman, this is the Model T Ford age, you know, the Depression age. And this man and his wife left town, I imagine, in a Model T Ford. But when he came back a little later on, he kept driving bigger cars. His wife was more finely attired. Finally, it got to the big cars and the mink coats. And, you know, everyone was quite proud of the man because here was a local boy making good, you know. Well, the gathering place for all men, young and old, is Heine Gipper's barber shop. And this gentleman that had engineered the bank robbery, well, Heine was one of his favorite people, and vice versa. And so one day in the barber shop, they said, "Hey, what are you doing? You're evidently making a lot of money. You're very successful." And, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. We would too. No, you wouldn't. We would too. Well, tell us. I said, "I'm probably the biggest bank robber and bootlegger in the whole state of Wisconsin." And they laughed uproariously. They didn't believe it, of course. And here he was just being honest with them, you know. And I don't know, it was hilarious, you know. It got a lot of chuckles for a good many years down the road. Yeah. It isn't often that an outright burglar or criminal of any kind will come out and tell you, you know. I don't think Jesse James ever announced that he was going to rob his bank.
My father moved from Beloit, Wisconsin to Strawberry. He had charge, or was called here as a pastor. And then I worked for Goodrich Produce first. I was bookkeeper there. And then I worked for Dick Wells in the jewelry store. And then I finally got into the bank. Well, I remember when the men came in, we really thought they were just customers. You know, they had their briefcases, and they were coming in there, and we didn't think much about it. We were all, well, we were trying to get closed up for the day, and I was counting my money in my till. Everybody was doing that, and all of a sudden when they came up to my window, why, of course that was startled me, and point your gun at me. Well, then this one man said to me, "Put your hands up." And I said, "What? It's a hold up." And I put them up higher. Why, you couldn't put your hands up any higher if you couldn't, that's all. You were just stiff, that was all. Well, then they came back of the vault, back of the cage there, and started ushering us out to the vault. That's where we ended up. As soon as they got toward the vault, then we were all handcuffed. Crazy things. There was no wire, no light in there. Everything was dark, and we were just, well, imagine 6 people beside 3 of us, and the vault wasn't very big. We were just standing on top of each other. I can still feel how you could feel somebody else breathing in your face or breathing on your neck. It was so close. I remember this lady, one lady that was locked in the vault, because she came, I think she came from Arlington. She was a teacher, and she wore a lace hat, and she was so afraid her little lace hat just wiggled on her head. I remember that. Well, all of us were afraid. Of course, we were afraid we wouldn't be able to breathe. And the more you're afraid, the less you can do those things, too. Of course, it was scary. When they had us all put in the vault and couldn't put anybody else in the vault anymore, which was filled, we were standing on top of each other practically. Then the robbers shut the door, locked it, turned the lock on the vault, and then we started to panic in there because we knew we'd have to have some oxygen. But we did have one little jar, or little bottle, whatever it was, of oxygen, but we didn't try it. Then we started pounding on the door, but we did hear our boss come in. The robbers also, I think, locked the door as they went out. That is the bank door. And then we started pounding, and Mr. Matthews was our cashier, our boss at that time. He had been at the depot looking for train connection because my vacation was supposed to start the next week, and I was going to go to Texas. And he came in there, and we yelled, and he couldn't hear us, but he could hear us pounding against the door. And he thought we were down in the basement because we also had a vault down in the basement, which we didn't use only for supplies. And he went down there, and we kept yelling at him, and he finally came to the vault, and he started to use the combination to get the vault. He often told us that to that day he didn't remember how he ever got it open. But there we were, and then here we were with handcuffs. No fun.
A statewide alarm was broadcast today describing the robbers of the Union Bank and Trust Company. They were unmasked, were well dressed in brown suits, and appeared between 25 and 30 years of age. The robbery was perfectly timed, taking only 15 minutes. An accomplice sat in an auto in front of the bank with the engine running. The sheriff and a number of state men are actively searching for the criminals. It is the hope of everyone in Strawberry Point that they are caught. Clayton County Press Journal, Thursday, June 26, 1930.
Well, I've always been a history buff from my childhood on, and I never realized that sometime in later life that the opportunity would come about for me to get involved in something like this, especially in my hometown. When I was about 7 years old, I do happen to recall that my uncle went to visit one of the robbers up in the penitentiary in Wisconsin. Why I would remember that, I do not know, but back in those days when somebody done something a little different, back in 1932 or some such matter, you happen to remember those, and how often does anybody ever go visit a bank robber? So I guess it must have impressed me. History is important to all communities, especially local history, because in our society these days, everybody is moving around all of the time. And if you want to know anything about your local history, there's just not anybody available to tell you about it.
Bank robberies this year in Glen Haven, Wisconsin, Gardner, Illinois, and Strawberry Point, Iowa, were cleared up Saturday by the confession of William Clifton, 22. Clifton is in custody in Lancaster, Wisconsin, as are 3 of those he implicated. Joseph Ashby, 30, R.B. Walker, 24, formerly of Strawberry Point, and Glenn Lanyo, 25, of Watseka. All 3 deny any part in the robberies. Clifton confessed after the cashier of the Glen Haven Bank identified him and Walker as 2 of the holdup gang. Walker, who lived near Strawberry Point, was declared by Clifton to be the boss of the gang. Last January, the gang launched its career. Walker, who did not participate in the holdup itself, remained in the car and, according to Clifton, was given 1/7 of the loot. Dubuque Telegraph-Herald, Sunday, December 7th, 1930.
Personally, I remember very little about the bank robbery. It's only what my sister told me. I was just a kid at that time. Just before closing time, some fellows come in, pulled guns, told them to get in the hand over the money, and then herded them all into the vault and locked the vault on them. And I believe one of the bankers had just gone out, Mr. Dunfront, I think, so he was not included in the people that were locked in. But my sister and a couple of other ladies that worked in the bank were included in the group. My sister Hilda had to go to Elkader, to the sheriff's office and to the jail, and to identify one of the men who had been picked up as being the one who had held a gun on her, I guess. That's the way I remember it anyway. This is a picture that my sister Hilda preserved after the Clayton County Sheriff sent it to her, and I believe it's the one young robber by the name of Ashby who was involved. She didn't have the name on the back, and I'm sure she does not remember now who it is, but anyway, she had to go to Elkader after he was in jail over there and identify him as one of the robbers that held a gun on her and helped to herd all of the people into the vault.
Sheriff Chris Larson accompanied Miss Hilda Swanziger to Elkader, Iowa, where she identified one of the men who robbed the Union Bank and Trust. Those implicated in the robbery have finally confessed. Clayton County Press Journal, Thursday, December 11th, 1930.
Why is this story important? We were really one of the first bank robbers around, right close here. I have so much junk in here, but it's fun. Erica says that's fun. Grandma, I like to look at it. She remembered that I had been in the bank, had been in the robbery, and she says, "Grandma, tell me about this, about your robbery." And we were sitting here just visiting one evening, and she says, "I'd like to know what happened. Were you hurt, Grandma?" I said, "No, I wasn't hurt, but I was very, very upset."
For young people, it's a little hard to imagine the times. You know, these were tough times. In your little towns, an average working person, you know, he had a cow probably, and a hog or two, a flock of chickens, and maybe his wife canned 600-700 quarts of stuff to see him through the winter, and things were not at all like they are now. And 50 cents an hour, maybe wages, 60 cents. And it's hard for young people today to imagine. And yet, with all of that, you know, they had a lot of fun and a lot of socializing. People were probably closer than they are now.
Well, storytelling can be an art, and I think it is good for people to tell their children and grandchildren stories of what happened when they were young. For instance, when I was young and getting out of high school in the Depression, and work was very difficult to find, and the kids nowadays won't believe that we worked for 50 cents a day or 25 cents a month, and very little spending money to go on. This robbery was so very important to my sister because she was directly involved and was locked in the bank vault, and I might say had the wits scared out of her. So I'm sure that she probably had a few sleepless nights, and no doubt it came back to her more often in her dreams, possibly.
R.B. Walker, who had confessed to being in charge of the bank robbery in Strawberry Point, Iowa, was sentenced Monday to the Wisconsin State Prison for a term not to exceed 25 years. He had awaited his sentence with fortitude. Clayton County Press Journal, Thursday, December 18th, 1930.
History, to me, is the most important thing there is going, and if you don't have history, you don't have anything. You got to have something to go back on and to build on.
I'd like to have you remember me that I was a good wife and a good mother. Hopefully. Grandmother.
I'd like to leave a few memories behind, you know, that I was always a good promoter of Strawberry Point, and I raised a wonderful family and with the aid of a wonderful wife, and lots of friends in Strawberry and around the countryside.
I know I think it was Erica one day said, "Grandma, I don't think any of my friends have a grandma that was ever held up in the bank," which was very different.
The original Union Bank and Trust Company building is now an office. The present bank thrives with assets of $37 million. Glenn Lanyo was sentenced to 40 years at the Men's Reformatory at Anamosa. William Clifton was sentenced to 25 years at the Wisconsin State Prison. R.B. Walker served 12 years in the Wisconsin State Prison, was paroled, and became a used car salesman in Strawberry Point. He died in 1983. Merle Schmidt, Helen Yar Gertis, and Hilda Swanziger still live in Strawberry Point. Bernard Fenchel died in September of 1992. This film is dedicated to his memory.